in the water, in the red glass,
My memories are you guys are from River Falls.
Yes.
So we have a treat tonight, for sure. Many of you were here when we had the scaffolding up, and you didn't know what was going on underneath all of that plywood that was across there, and you had to walk under, and there was sort of it seemed like some kind of little treacherous process of getting from point A to point B through the reception area. But it's finished, and now we've had some time to enjoy the wonderful glass work that we have in our lobby. And it is by Douglas and Renee Sigwarth. They are from River Falls, so we pulled this a little farther away from Madison. And the piece is called A River of Glass, which I think describes it very well. So tonight, we get to hear some of the background for how this project came together. And we're also going to get to see some of the other installations that the Sigwarths have done. And so I am just going to turn this over to Doug.
Thank you.
And as I said, I think we have a treat in store as to how all this works.
Thank you. I have a. Good evening, everyone. It's so nice to be back here and to see you all again, and I'm not driving that lift and trying to avoid you as you're trying to keep out of the way from everything in the ceiling. Let me get to this first. I'll start the slideshow from here. Okay, so like Sally said, my wife Renee and I'm Douglas Sigwarth. We're the glass artists that created the installation in your lobby. First, before we get started, I want to offer several thanks. There were so many people involved in this project that helped us along the way. First, of course, Tim Conroy and the executives at Capital Lakes and PRS. Without their funding, that would not have happened. So that is very great that they were willing to put their money towards fine art in your public space there. I'd also like to thank Sally and the Art Committee for all of your efforts. First, for coming up with the idea to have art here in your home, and then also choosing us to be the ones to do the installation. Monica Rajo, who is the designer and architect who did the remodel and designs for the space here. I worked with her very closely, almost daily along the way. This was a 6-month process, and she helped turn this from the idea stage into the tangible. I'd like to thank Brian and Pete Hudson from Witt Manufacturing. They're the engineers who helped us with creating the steel structures and what supported the glass to be able to hang it from the ceiling the way we did. And finally, I'd like to thank Gary with McGann. Him and his crew did a great job of taking down the ceiling and putting the steel framework up and getting it so it was ready for us to come and install the glass that we created. So I'd just like to tell you a brief history about us, about Sigwarth Glass. First of all, Renee and I, we met at the ripe young age of 23 in 1993 in Burnsville, Minnesota. We were both waiters at Baker Square Restaurant, and we fell in love over pie. So I had just graduated with my undergraduate degree, my bachelor's degree in fine art theater, and Renee was an artist. And when we first met, we had a lot in common, but Renee had so much passion and excitement about glassblowing. She had just become exposed to glassblowing. A friend of hers brother was a professional glassblower. And she had been doing all forms of art in school. And when she saw glassblowing, she knew that she was going full steam ahead with gusto, that glassblowing was her future. Well, I thought she was pretty cool, and I liked her passion, and I kind of took a different course. I got off my theater course, and I started blowing glass with her, because I liked her for one, and we enjoyed each other's company, but I was just so enamored by her passion for the glass. So Renee started blowing glass at a community college north of Minneapolis, and I soon followed, and then we both went to the University of Wisconsin, River Falls to study studio glass. And we were there for a few years. We decided to get married, and on our honeymoon we wanted to go to Murano to see the glass blowers. That was our big trip of a lifetime, to be inspired. For those of you who don't know about Murano, it's the island of Murano is just off of Venice. And glassblowing used to happen in Italy and Venice, but they moved all the glassblowers off to an island so they couldn't burn down the city. So we wanted this to be our big trip before we started a family, and thought, well, we might not be able to do something like this ever again. Well, it was on our trip that we discovered something really interesting about our history that we had no clue of. We were taking an international flight, switching planes in Chicago. We got booted from one line. You know how serendipity happens, how you start one thing, and you get moved over to here, and somehow you get in this other line. Well, we get into this line, and this lady takes my passport, and she acts like she knows me. She recognizes my last name. She says, "I know all you Sigwarths." I'm like, "You do?" I'm thinking she maybe knows my relatives from Iowa, which is where I grew up. But she had an accent that I didn't recognize. Well, it turns out she's from Switzerland. She says, my brother-in-law, my nephew, they all work at the Sigwarth Glass factory in Hergisville, Switzerland. We're like, what? There's a factory with our name on it, and it exists? You're kidding me. But we're ready to leave for a honeymoon. We're going off to Venice. We're going to go, the trip of a lifetime. We're like, but we wanted her to tell us all about it. So this was, in '96, no one had cell phones. Remember we had the phones you picked up off the wall, and we're like, please call us, collect. There was long distance back then. Call us, collect, please tell us all about it. Well, she did. 2.5 weeks later, she gave us a call and told us all about this factory in Hergisville. It's called Glacis de Hergisville. That might be, the accent might be way off, but So anyway, she sends us some catalogs and information, and that was our first little nugget into our heritage. So we came back from Venice with this kind of full steam ahead passion. We were students being like, we're just gonna become glass blowers. But you don't know how you're gonna work out the details, But after we got this information about glass blowing in our history, we're like, we're not going to ask any more questions. We're just going to do it, and we're going to figure it out as we go. So we named our business Sigwarth Glass, and because it was on the internet and everyone was Googling names, well, there was a number of Sigwarth Glass relatives from overseas who found us and filled in the pieces. So it turns out that my great-great-grandfather, who's in the picture in the upper right-hand corner, his name is Ludwig. He came to the United States from the Black Forest in Germany in 1850s, because at that time, Italy was city-states, and there were wars breaking out, who would stake a claim in different land areas, he didn't want his family to be any part of war. So he he took the trip to America. And he came to the East Coast, and him and his two eldest sons blew glass in a glass factory in Pittsburgh. I'm not sure if I already said this point. He actually came from a glass blowing village in the Black Forest. So when he came to the United States, that's what he knew, that was his business, that was his trade, so he did that as well. They were selling land lottery tickets to move settlers from the East Coast, bringing them to the Midwest. Well, he happened to win a plot of land in rural Iowa. Well, he became a farmer at that point. So glass blowing left our line of Sigwarths with him. So I credit Renee into bringing glass blowing back into our line of Sigwarth family glass members. So that was kind of a nice story for us to have the serendipity of it all. So we came back in 1996. We were students for several more years, and we bought some land in River Falls, built our house, built an extra detached building along with it, and that's where we created our studio. And since 2001, when we opened up our studio, we've been working as professional artists under the name Sigwarth Glass. So the first way that we marketed ourselves was at fine art fairs outdoors. Just like the art fair in the square that you have every year, a couple of blocks from here, we do those festivals all throughout the country. We started out doing a handful, staying more locally, branched out over years. We've spread out throughout the country. And I'd say after maybe 5 or 6 years of making a living that way, we kind of got into a rhythm, into a routine. We go, we sell a handful of pieces to people to take home, put on their mantle, and enjoy and love and collect from us. But then little by little, bigger opportunities started to unfold for us. And the first one that happened, more like an installation, like what's happening, what happened here with you guys. So our first installation, we were doing an art show in Milwaukee. A man walks in our booth, takes a look at the globes that we make. I'm sure you saw the slideshow before, all of these globes. Well, we've been making those globes for quite a while. And he walks in, he goes, "Oh my, I've been looking all over the world for these." And I kind of thought he was a little bit overstating or being exaggerating. He goes, "I'm gonna need at least 50 of these." Now we have come at that point, we're used to people walking in and saying, "I'll take them all," or "wrap it all up," kind of a thing. So we just assumed that was that kind of a statement. But it turned out he was actually an architect, and he was in charge of creating and building the Elmhurst Memorial Hospital in Elmhurst, Illinois. And he was telling us about this healing garden that he wanted to create. And as you can see from the photo, it's all surrounded by windows, and those were all patients' rooms. And this was going to be the children's cancer section. And he wanted to create something that would be fun and whimsical and happy for these kids who were just having the fight of their life. So we began to realize that this business that we were in creating art wasn't just, not that it's just, but there could be a piece, it could be something you hold in your hand and small, or it could be something that's like creating an environment. It could be something that affects people on a daily basis. And so that was kind of our first exposure to doing something that felt like we were changing people's lives. Our next installation was here in Madison at the Old Brick Botanic Gardens. This piece is hanging in the conservatory, and it was our first piece that we suspended in the air. Our most notable installation came shortly after that, and this is at the Museum of Wisconsin Art up in West Bend. This piece was commissioned by James and Karen Hyde, and the title of the piece is called Interconnection. What it is, if you haven't seen it, it's 3 columns of glass spheres that are suspended in the air. They're about 20 feet long each, and we worked with the mathematical theme of the trio. It's a triangular space, it's a point, it's coming up a landing. And so the three columns are hung at, in a triangle. There's 3 globes on each level of the column, and the colors have 3, and they spiral around in a swirl like a helix. So anyway, that was, we completed that piece. It was the first piece that the museum, the new museum, they moved from one location into the new building. This was the first piece installed in that new building. This garden installation is in a sculpture garden in Sarasota, Florida, just outside of, it's called the Museum of Art and Whimsy, and it's near the Ringling Museum. And last year, we were commissioned by Epic Systems in Verona to do, for Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, lots of lollipops around their landscaping. So that was a real fitting piece there. So that brings us to you. We were approached last year, early in the year, by Monica from Ancrum Moisen, and we got an email asking if we would be interested in submitting a proposal. And as with any proposal, it takes a lot of time to kind of ponder things and to get a sense of what direction you might go. Things twist and turn and change. But anyway, so one of the challenges we had when she reached out to us was we couldn't just walk across the street or drive on the other side because we live 4 hours away to put ourselves in your lobby and get a feel for the space. So we looked at the photos, and I don't know, does anyone remember what that used to look like with the real colonial yellow and anyway, so we took a look at the pictures, but it was something we would have to kind of file in the back of our brain. We would build some glass for other things. We'd live our life, do housework, raise our kids. Well, one day after we were done blowing glass for the day, we did one of our favorite things, which is go on a date to Minneapolis and go see independent movie at the Uptown Movie Theater. But we always stop and get ourselves a Sebastian Joe's ice cream first. It's a local chain, it's artisan ice cream, and I mean, it's just great. We love ice cream. So, we're sitting in the restaurant, both of us not really talking much, just eating our ice cream, kind of looking around, but this project was on our minds. Both of us are thinking, how do I visualize a ceiling this high, this wide, this long? And as I'm looking up, I think to myself, well, that looks like it's about 18 feet up there. I said, Renee, do you think that's about as high as the ceiling of Capitol Lakes? She goes, yeah, that sounds about right. And then the width looked right, the length looked right. So we sat there eating our ice cream cones, looking up at the sky, and that's when our inspiration started to come. We could actually start to visualize what something would look like. The ice cream place had, it had a similar feel. So anyway, the one thing that we came to realize was, like here, the straight lines were very boxy and square. And when we blow glass, blowing glass is different than stained glass or fused glass. You're dealing with cut square edges and that kind of applications. But with blowing, it's like it's expansion. It's like a balloon. It's 3-dimensional. So we were wondering, how can we create that kind of effect in a space like that? So we started thinking, well, we obviously can't make one big piece to fill the space. It's just impossible. We're going to have to make several pieces, and we're going to have to arrange them in a way that creates angles and flow. So that's kind of where we were starting. That was our starting point. Might not sound like much, but that was the starting point. So we also were looking at the proposal and some of the design ideas from the architect was to have things suspended, and she used the term from invisible wire. And I said, oh, okay. And I asked the question, do you have access to or knowledge of anything like that material? And she says, no. So I'm like, okay, how are we going to get some kind of invisible material that's going to hang, that's going to be secure, because I don't think anybody wants to walk under something that could, invisibly come to the ground. So we started thinking about that, and we consulted with our engineer who has answers for everything. So that's the one thing I've learned as being an artist, and just about anything I've ever done, is not to be afraid if I don't know something, just to go ask somebody, and not to be afraid to say, I don't know, what do you think, can you give me some ideas? And it usually points you in a direction you would have never known. The next piece that helped us with the design idea was this part of the package, which was all about nature. And I know that they were really working on incorporating nature into your remodel. And so there were a number of these images that really spoke to Renee and I, like, well, when we make glass, we can kind of make this effect. We can make our pieces look like plants, or we can make them have like striping or veining or granule kind of feels with texture, with different opacities of glass and whatnot. So that really got us thinking about actual pieces. So we started blowing some samples. And as you can see along the right side of that image, those were particularly the textures that were inspiring to us. We wanted to see if we could recreate something like that. And so in the glass, you see we have this gold, and behind the gold is layers of, it's an opalescent white, and it's in different sized granules, and it really blocks the light and lets light come through. And some areas look really rich and warm, and other areas, kind of more shaded. So that was kind of what we had set forth as a proposal. And then we started drawing. So we started thinking we would make these pieces as blown out discs, because for the sheer fact that we knew that anything we hung in the air was going to look a lot smaller further away than it is when I hold it in my hand. So we kind of had to make pieces that we knew we could consistently make as big as we could for that visual impact. So by spinning the glass wide open and making them into plates, it would just take up more space and have more impact from far away. So as we drew this S shape around the bottom image there, that's the outline of the cove. And then the two squares of the skylights. And so as we're looking at that S shape, we thought, well, it's kind of looking like cobblestones in a river. And that was when the idea of the river kind of came up. We thought, well, we could be making some glass pieces that are floating on the river. Or there's so many images that can get conjured up by that. So that's kind of the direction that we were going with. And plus, obviously, a river is nature, and so that just felt like what we would submit as our proposal. And initially, from talking with our engineer, he talked about having these steel lanyards that would be our invisible wire, but they're not really invisible. But if we had them coated in plastic, that it would have kind of a sheen to it so that it would not be obvious. It would be as indescript as possible. So our thoughts were we would just back the ceiling with plywood and screw right into there. And he says, nope, not going to happen. That whole ceiling is not going to hold that. So then we started talking framework and structures and whatnot. So he had an idea for us. He says, well, why don't you use this I-beam steel? Well, of course, course, Renee and I look at each other like he's crazy. He's not an artist. He has no. We're trying to take square, straight lines out of this image. We're not trying. We want it to bend and curve. So as we're explaining to him, we want it to bend and curve. He says, well, we can take it to a material bender. We can make the steel flow any way you want. So he showed me pictures and images, and I thought, well, that sounds really cool. And he says, and then so his idea for us to present to the architects was to have those I-beams attached right up to the roof trusses, and then create there's a clamp that he would custom make attached to the linear, and then that would come down to the glass. So that idea was accepted. And we moved forward then with working on the actual design of color. So the designer was very specific about a color palette. Now, we weren't looking to make something that was going to match the drapes, as they say, but we didn't want it to like jump out and hit you in the face either. So it kind of had to have that happy medium. So the colors that the designer already liked that we worked with were those three colors on the left. Real neutral shades of champagne, smoky topaz, beige, and gray. And so we talked about that, and we talked about how we could incorporate some pops of color. So in the initial process of doing color, we created, I'd say, several dozen color samples, which were little rondelles of glass, where we would take a color sample, make a little tiny piece with little bits of frit in it, so she could put them on a light table and start comparing them to their fixtures and whatever else they were using. So that's how we came up with those three as the main palette. But then we were thinking, well, a river, water is reflective. Glass is reflective. Glass is transparent, water is reflective. So what if this river is actually reflecting back to the world like a mirror image? So that was how we decided to incorporate colors into it. So the first color we thought was it would incorporate elements of the sky, which is the first section on this side of the installation. And then it would go back into its main palette and then start to show reflections of the sun. And then after that, it would show reflections of plant life and trees. So the color palette was set, and now it was time to start engineering the project. So these are the two men who helped us immensely. This is Brian and Pete. And the first step was creating those I-beams. So they did a number of mechanical drawings, like the one in the upper corner. So they had kind of a twofold process that we were working with them on. The first was those curved beams at the ceiling, and the second was how to suspend the glass and connect that glass to those beams. So we tried several different techniques, and what we landed on was this caliper that they were able to do adjustments to. They were able to weld on a gripper jaw, a gripper piece that would come in and pinch the glass and hold it together. And then they were able to create a turnbuckle that would tighten it down and keep the pinch holding it all together. And another thing we really liked about this design is that it was very inobtrusive. It is very streamlined, it's thin, and it's also curved. So it, again, ties into having elements of curves and flows. And then there's a photo with Brian after the curved tracks had been designed and curved and sent back from the welders and getting ready to be sent to the sandblasters on the painter. So this is how I This is how we designed those tracks. We drew maybe 50 copies. I have your cove ceiling memorized in my brain. I dreamt about it. Some of these curves are aesthetically drawn because that's how we wanted the river to curve. Other ones had to avoid a sprinkler. Others had to avoid a smoke detector that just couldn't be moved. So some of it was aesthetic and some of it was just downright functional. There was no way around it. So those red lines on there are the curved tracks, and then we sent those drawings, those scale drawings, to the architect, and she put them into actual mechanical drawings that all of the workers worked off of. And then this is a computerized drawing that shows what we were envisioning the glass plates would look like once they were hanging. And then we got to work on all the plates. This was the longest part of the whole process, really, was the planning. Before, it took us about 4 months to blow all the glass, but it took several months before the actual architectural drawings could get approved. So what they needed to do was, first of all, find the plans for the roof trusses for the lobby. And they had to send that to a structural engineer. And he had to be able to determine, well, how much weight can this ceiling hold? And, are we gonna need to add support beams and all that? So what he determined was, first of all, the good news, which we were all thrilled about in July, was yes, this ceiling will hold about, I honestly have forgotten how many pounds it was, but whatever the pounds were gonna be. And so we all did a happy dance there. But he said, unfortunately, you're going to need to remove the entire sheetrock ceiling to get to the trusses and install all of these horizontal steel reinforcements. They're unistruts. So if you can see along those curves, there are like a purpley blue horizontal about every 2 feet. So that every 2 feet, all of those curved beams are welded up to that. So if you're wondering what was happening above those scaffolds, that's what was going on that week. So the I-beams were finished, and we loaded them up into a U-Haul. That was the emptiest U-Haul I've ever rented. But the beams were 17 feet long, so we had to rent a 20-foot truck. I wanted to run a 17-foot truck, but apparently a 17-foot truck isn't a 17-foot truck. So I did a 20-foot truck to hold a 17-foot long beam, whatever. I don't understand what that means. But so we drove the truck here, dropped him off, and headed back to River Falls early in November, actually. So this was Gary's fun time. They installed the scaffolds, and those pictures show them up in the air taking down the sheetrock and installing the unistrut, and next came the steel beams. So see how they curve around the skylights there. He said it was really nice though, because they had the scaffolds right up to the ceiling, and they could literally just touch everything up there, so that was kind of nice. And then this was the photo of what everything looked like once the scaffolds came down and they were ready for us to come and install the glass. All right, next I'm going to tell you how we make glass. So Renee and I have been working together since 1993. When we were students, we both worked individually. We assisted the other, but we made our own body of work. We made our work from start to finish all on our own. And my work resembled kind of the way that the Italian glass blowers worked, and Renee's work seemed to have more of a Scandinavian influence. When we decided to work as partners, we realized we did not want to have our work represent two different bodies. We were a partnership. This wasn't like her work and my work. This was us together. So we had to come up with a technique on how our work could genuinely reflect our partnership. So we divided the tasks in half. I take the leadership on the first portion of each piece that we make, which is the layering of the glass. So we take molten glass at 2,000 degrees, build up multiple layers on the end of a blowpipe, clear glass, colored glass. We have to let it cool to about 1,000 degrees so we can put another 1,000 or 2,000 degree layer on top of that. Let that cool, add more. So that's a very timely process. It takes, our roles in the piece is pretty equal. Like the time it takes to layer the glass is about the amount of time it takes for Renee to blow it and shape the glass. And we discovered something in doing that. Our work took on this third entity, which was truly the partnership. And so we've been working that way ever since. So this portion is a much abbreviated version of how we add color to the glass. So we're starting, I have a blowpipe in front of me. In the center of my chest there you see the glass. That glass that's at the end of the blowpipe, it just looks clear like a drinking glass, but it's 900 degrees. So you wouldn't want to touch that with your hand. Now the glass that Renee is bringing me is molten. It's 2,000 degrees. So she has it on a solid rod that's not a blowpipe. You can't blow into it to create a bubble. It's just solid. And then she brings it, I drizzle it onto the blowpipe, or onto the glass, and then I'm going to cut it. I bring it back to my workbench, and I use a steel paddle to smooth. Oh, I knew that would happen. Sorry about that. I just wanted to pause it. Will that let me pause it? Okay, good. So we're going to go back. So, and then I just smooth in the glass color, and I wrap that bubble over top of that clear base. Then I go back into the glass blowing furnace several times and gather multiple layers of molten clear glass. So on this portion, this is after my last layer of clear glass. So it's solid, and that glass is juicy hot. If I stop turning it, it'll ooze right off of the blowpipe and onto the floor. And I'm shaping it, I was shaping it with a wooden block made of cherry wood, and it's wetted down so that the steam is actually, it's floating on the steam to shape the glass. So before the glass gets too cold, I bring it over to these scoops that are holding granulated glass called frit. So the first thing we're going to roll through is the frit that is more coarse, and it's going to give more texture, and it's an opal white. Then after I have a good coating on it, I can go back into my oven, turn it to heat it back up to soften that layer, bring it back to the other scoop, and shade it in with a more fine granule. And then this is the final coating. We do that several times, but that layer is a gray. So the first color she brought me looked like a red, but all the colors look red when they're that hot. And then the outer layer is gray. So we sandwich white in between those same inner and outer colors. Then while it's really thick, we blow it into a tool called an optic mold. And as you see, it blows and it expands and it pushes against those vertical ridges. And that's what cuts lines into the glass. Then as we pull it out and blow into it and expand it, where the line is more concentrated and dark, it stays dark through the whole process, and the rest of in between thins out. So if we broke it, it would look wavy. Now Renee's taking over, and she's going to start shaping the glass. So she takes it from me after I've created a neck in it, and she's going to now be in charge, and she starts blowing. Or having me blow, she's directing me. So the person who's in charge is called the gaffer. So if we want to be playful with each other sometimes, we'll have to say, well, do you think you should do that? The other will say, I'm the gaffer, I'm in charge on this part. So she's having me blow, and you can see the bubbles expanding. Her goal is to expand the glass so it has a nice even wall thickness. Now that we have the bubble all blown out to its full capacity, we're going to add that clear foot to the back of it that we were talking about, that the clamp is going to reach into and grab. So she's going into the glass blowing furnace, gathering out several layers and drizzling that glass right onto the marver. That's a steel table. So we're using industrial size shears there to cut the glass. And then there's a mirror here against the wall. That's what we're using to see what we're doing to help center up that foot. That's the piece that's going to connect. So now I've gone into the oven and I've softened that up a bit, and I'm creating a groove so that the clamp will fit into that area. Renee's flattening the bottom with a cherry wood paddle. So we have a nice flat surface behind it. And then we're going to transfer that blown piece onto a solid piece that Renee is holding. So I'm putting it in the center of the bubble. I'm lining it up with those tweezers. And it's really important that we don't let the top of it get too cold, which is the part attached to the blowpipe. Because if it goes into the oven and it's too cold, it'll thermal shock and break. So we have to work pretty quickly. We use tile saw to score that line, tap it, and then it transfers. Now it's onto Renee's pipe. And she can start to open the lip and shape the opening. So now she's going in and out of the oven, and in several steps she'll keep coming back to the workbench, and using the jacks she goes inside the lip and spins it. And now that tool that I used to pinch initially, she is using to open. She's gliding it open and pulling it. So I'm using that paddle to actually shield her hand, because there's an immense amount of heat that's coming out of that glass piece. So as it gets hotter and hotter, you see it has more motion and more movement. And her goal here is to get that opening nice and round and flat, but not flared, just open kind of flat, because then she can start heating it into the oven to open it all the way. So this is that final step before she's going to do the final open. She's got it all straightened up, nice straight sides, and then next one. This is her opening the piece. This is the color on this one is different. This one is not the gray one that we were working on in the previous video. This is her opening one that's champagne, so it's more white. So she's heating, and when it's ready, and she feels like it has enough movement, she can pull the punty back and then spin it. And centrifugal force flares that plate open. She takes it off of the yolk and using gravity to shape it. So she doesn't even have to touch it to shape it. The speed of her turning it and holding it down and back is what shapes it. And she waits for the glass to cool enough that it starts to stiffen up, and then we have to get it off of the pipe, because if we let it get too cold, the piece will crack and break in front of us. So she's tapping it, chilling it, and then hitting it to break it off and into my hands. And now we put it into an oven called an annealing oven, and that's where the glass will need to cool. If the glass cooled on its own, when it reached about 850 degrees, it would break. So it has to go through the annealing temperature range from 900 degrees to room temperature very slowly. So then we have all these pieces made, about, I think with samples, we probably made around 200 of those plates. And we've dedicated our living room, because we were just piling up everywhere. We had to make our living room, our great room, into a studio, basically. So, we've got two young adult children living with us, so their house was glass plates everywhere. They grew up with that, though. When they were little, have to be dodging glass balls, walking around. So this was nothing new for them, but it was very exciting for our family to have this transformation, to see all these glass pieces every day coming out of the studio. We would create piles in our great room of different colors and sizes so that we could ultimately get to the point where we were going to plan how they were going to be hanging here at Capitol Lakes. So I laid out these wooden panels on the floor, and as you can see, there are those markings for measurements, so I could do kind of a scale. And then we used these clear risers to simulate what they would look like in the air, only on the ground. So I would look down at them to see how the glass was rising up from the floor as opposed to down from the ceiling. As we finished them, they would get boxed up and labeled and ready to come here for installation day. And this was installation day. This is when we all met. You saw me driving the lift around and the beeping and the buzzing and the up and the down. It was quite a weekend. But we sure enjoyed talking with all of you, and all of your encouraging words coming through and saying, oh, you're getting more done. It's coming along. Are you going to be done by Christmas? Barely. We got home. We were hosting Christmas Eve morning at our house with our family, with my mom and my sister, and my side of the family was coming for brunch. Well, we got in at midnight the night before. We got up in the morning, made it to Sam's Club, and made it back by lunchtime. So we still hosted and everything was good. So this was fun. This was us being almost done. This was Sunday night, and we had, it seemed like this much space to go. We're like so tired, and we're trying to decide, are we going to be able to do this? Do we finish tonight, or do we finish in the morning? So we thought, well, we'll give it one more shot, we'll keep at it, but then just little signs were telling us it was time to be done. Dropped a little nut from, 20 feet in the air onto the ground, made a loud noise. I'm like, okay, if my fingers are getting too tired to tighten stuff down, we don't want to lose anything else than this little nut. So we're going to call it a night and finish in the morning, which is what we did. So then I had some fun while I was up there. I thought, now you guys are going to get to see it down below, but nobody's going to get to see it up here. I'm the only one who got to see it up that high. So I wanted to share some photos of what it looked like on the lift, looking around. So that was kind of an interesting vantage point to be up there. And they almost looked like a flock of birds, flying along here. And there's the finished piece. So we were kind of going through our paperwork once we got home and sorting through what we needed to keep and what we could get rid of. And we found this notebook, or this piece of scratch paper, it was folded in a notebook. And on it there were a bunch of words. And I'm like, oh, this is from the project. Oh, this is from our first kind of brainstorming session. And it was kind of fun to come back to it and to kind of see, did we accomplish what our goal was? We wanted to create a river. We wanted it to be flowing and be from nature, have some texture, have it be evolving, have it be tranquil, soothing, reflect seasons, have it be flowing and changing. And I guess I would have to say I think we accomplished that, so I feel proud of that. So in closing, I just want to share with you our artist statement about the piece. And then we'll open it up to question and answers if you have any questions that maybe I haven't covered. So the title is Reflections, a River of Glass. We approach the water's edge and we reflect on our life's journey. As water flows through a river, so do days in our life. Whether a raging rapids or a gentle current, a river reflects our life experience. At first, we notice the literal mirroring from the sky, the sun, and the trees. We may even see hints from the ever-changing seasons. But as we look deeper, the reflections reveal aspects of ourselves. As light makes its way through the surface, we see colors that unlock glimpses of emotional memories from times past. These layers of both joy and pain give way to a gentle calm. A sense of beauty and of gratitude remains, as we are all a part of nature's majesty. So we thank you very much. I believe somebody has a microphone. If anybody has any questions at all you want to ask, feel free to raise your hand and we'll bring a microphone over.
Douglas, how will the glass discs be cleaned?
So, she was asking how will they be cleaned, and since there's not going to be any kind of like oils or anything like like not a kitchen or whatever, you don't have to worry about any kind of grease or whatever or fingerprints getting on there because no one's going to be out touching it. So it just will be dust. So I believe if somebody is on a lift and used like compressed air or even like a duster and just kind of did that, it would take care of it. Yes?
I'd like to know a little bit more about glass itself. There's lots of kinds of glass, like window glass, and there's Pyrex glass, and there's Coke bottles.
Okay, so
What characteristics of the glass do you seek? Where do you get your glass? How do you color it?
okay, cool. So the glass that we use is a lead-free crystal quality glass. Glass is made from, the base chemical is silica sand and all sorts of other chemicals that I'm the artist, not the scientist, so I don't know all of those details. I just like the clarity and consistency of the glass that we work with. So the colored glass is a whole very secretive industry in itself. In fact, we buy our glass from a German company called Reichenbach. And they're all very secretive of their formulas. There's certain colors that they would have a special formula for that they don't want anyone else to get, the knowledge of. So the way you get colored glass in general is to add different metals, different oxides to create the different hues. So we layer the glass at 2,000 degrees. We can either do solid chunks of color, like in that first demo, that was a solid chunk that Renee heated up, and we're able to do a smooth application of color. Or we can get colored glass in granulated form that can be like rolled in. Now, your question about like industrial type glass, how that's a little different. So over the ages, different formulas of glass have been developed and created for different purposes. So an industrial kind of glass that you would have be more utilitarian function, like a Coke bottle or something. It would need to go through an assembly line and cool very quickly, and there wouldn't be a long working period with it. Art glass, crystal glass, is thought of as, or called soft glass. It's the kind of glass that you can heat up and it's malleable, you have kind of a working time with it, it doesn't stiffen up super quickly. So that's about what I have with it. Did that answer any other about? Yeah, okay. Yes?
So I'm sure you, do they have a microphone somewhere?
She's coming.
First of all, thank you for this sensational and exquisite installation. It's just a magnificent opportunity every time. Every time I see it, I'm just thrilled and my spirits are lifted.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you, and thanks for coming to talk about your process. So I'm wondering if you are planning to be at the art fair on the square. Are you still doing art fairs? Are you bringing any of the leftover discs. Not that
They
any
made
of us
great
could afford
Christmas
them.
presents. We had a lot of happy family members. Yes, we would love to do our Fair on the Square again. We do all of the shows, they're juried, so we have to apply, and we never know who the jury is going to be. And there is different tastes for juries. I know that we just got accepted today into the Lakefront Festival, which is in Milwaukee on Father's Day weekend, which we love to do. So we're there. But Art Fair on the Square is actually one of our favorite shows. It's the second art show that we did in our career, like when we started doing shows. And we did our first show in Edina, Minnesota, and we left very disappointed. We thought, we worked so hard, you show up, and you feel like the effort is just gonna be rewarded, and you leave we left that show feeling like, oh boy, is this what it's gonna be like? Is this gonna be really hard? And did we make a wrong choice? Well, a few weeks later, we came to Madison Art Fair on the Square, set up our stuff. I mean, we were very new. Our work was we weren't beginner glass blowers because, I mean, obviously we've been blowing glass for about 10 years, but we were new to the whole making glass to sell it in that kind of setting. And that show was a success. We left that show feeling like, okay, we're headed in the right direction, and we just kept growing and learning. And so we do typically around 20 art shows a year. This past year, we modified our schedule based on accepting this project, so we were home more working on this project as opposed to the shows.
So I have one other, I guess it's a question. I'm sure you are acquainted with Dale Chihuli's work, and that brand is ubiquitous. But I don't know if you know that he's an alum of UW-Madison.
Yes.
And we're happy about that. And one of his installations is in the Cole Center, which is Sports Center. So I think it's great that your installation is in a retirement community, for example. Not your only installation, but
Right.
that we need to have fine art in unexpected places.
Yes.
And so, thank you for accepting the proposal or coming on board, whatever the language is.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I appreciate that.
I just want to say, as usual, Jenny gives us the most eloquent statement, so I can only say ditto.
Well, one thing that came to me when we were installing the piece and getting to know you all is one of the questions out there amongst a lot of artists is wondering about the generation that is coming up. And if that generation is even interested in art. And, you know, I mean, everything has its time and place, and things ebb and they flow. But we do wonder, you know, with this minimalist society, living in tiny houses, wanting to have experiential instead of owning finer things, well, what is that going to do to things like acquiring art or having installations in buildings like this? So we felt like you all are from an era that has acquired the finer things in art and appreciate that sort of thing. Yes?
At the risk of sounding very mundane, what are the statistics? How many pieces of glass are there? How much does each one weigh?
Oh, okay. So we planned on using a maximum of 150 for the installation. But what we realized when we arrived and were installing the pieces, we used more of the bigger pieces instead of having, you know, we thought that there were going to be tighter spaces where we would use more smaller pieces. So just functionally, we were only able to use I believe it was more like 115 or whatever, but we have the same effect of the installation. Each one weighs around 5 pounds. Was there another question with the statistic about it?
No, that was it, I guess.
How many?
Oh, how many?
114.
Thank you.
Thank you for all of the effort, and I would love to see your river flowing like you do out in the sunlight. And you know, the sparkles here and there.
Yeah.
What about adding some of the blinking Christmas tree lights? Not different colors, but it'd have to be all clear color and get that movement.
You're saying to this installation or an inspiration for a different piece?
Well, we could try it here.
Well, I believe that part of the process that I just realized that I didn't touch on was the lighting. We did spend a lot of time working with the architects, and one of the main topics was they were in favor of backlighting the glass. And we felt like our experience was that there should be minimal backlighting and more front lighting. And also, who wants to stare up, look up with a light fixture in your eyes all day? So we tried to direct the ones that were on the ceiling in a way that they were aiming against sidewalls so that they weren't aimed directly in your faces. But the good side effect, or the good benefit that we found, some happy surprises, were that when the lighting came through those invisible wires we were talking about, it left these really cool kind of pickup sticks, kind of optics all around the cove, and in some areas the side angle of the glass being lit against the wall creates really interesting wavy patterns. So I don't know if you haven't noticed that, take a look at that too, not just the glass, but the reflections that happen onto the walls.
If I can, is this on?
It's on.
Is this on? Yes. I've noticed, by the way, when we come in the evenings, that you can see the patterns on the walls. In fact, the people who work at the desk have pointed out to me sometimes the patterns that they see as they're sitting behind the desk. So thank you for that. Your point about the small houses and what is going to happen in the next generation. Presumably, but I don't know this, you could get a similar effect with much smaller plates, could you not? So it seems to me that the notion that just because you've got a smaller space means that you're not interested in having something complex on your ceiling or something else would be a mistake. That in fact you could minimize to some extent the size of the little plates and still put your river on a wall or on a ceiling. So seems to me that that's a matter of judgment. We've got some lovely buildings around the country that you can do the kind of thing you're doing now. But if you wanted to, you could, instead of scaling up, you could scale down for the people who are the more general public, which hopefully you will do one day.
Well, we solved a lot of problems, or not problems, but we worked through structural puzzles and solved things that definitely we would use in the future. Every installation we've ever done has been learning from the one before, so this, the components that we used in this one, we could put forward into something else. All right.
So, before everybody leaves, I do want to point out we are serving wine and cookies. So feel free to stick around and have some refreshments. You can go out and look at the glass with a new view, new eyes after listening to this. So feel free